And I'm going to do my best to honor your time and try to give you the words that God gave to me. I remember somebody asked me once, how do you do your sermons? And my answer was pretty clear cut. It's basically whatever message God preaches to me in that week, I get to forward on to you guys. So when I say, let it be God's words, not mine, these are really just the words that He's given me throughout this week that I wanted to pass on to you guys, if that's okay. All right. So we're going to be starting a text that if you've grown up in or around the church, you have definitely heard this before. It's going to be coming from Psalm 23, verses, just go 1 through 4. I'll go ahead and read it. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. All right. Now, how many of us have heard this passage preached on before? Once or twice? Right, yeah. I've heard a lot, actually. And every time I've heard it, it seems like I've had a bit of a different take on it than what the preacher said. And I'm not going to say anybody else is wrong, but today I want to give a bit of a new perspective on this passage. Beth, we're talking about the passage where it's like, the Lord is my shepherd, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. That one. And every time I've heard it, I've always thought, I have a bit of a different perspective on this. And that perspective I want to share with you guys today. Now, like I said, my perspective is very visual. And so when I hear about a valley, is Lydia the only environmental science major here? Any others? Oh, we got two. All right. All right. Correct me if I'm wrong. Well, you're like double majoring, man. You're succeeding out here. All right. Correct me if I'm wrong. A valley, in a simple definition, it's a point of lower elevation in between 2 points of higher elevation, right?
Yes, sir.
Right. So basically, it's like if you're standing right here and you're in a valley, that means that you have a mountain on this side and you have a mountain on this side. And they kind of come together in like a U shape or more like a V shape. And right in the middle here, in this point of lower elevation, that's what a valley is, right? Yes? We following? Good. Like I said, I want to be very visual with this picture that I paint. Because it talks about, right in the middle here, the valley of the shadow of death. And I was kind of reading this, and that kind of jumped out at me. Why? Because it's a little bit different from the first part of these verses. Because the first part talks about the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He takes care of every need that I have, right? That's what a shepherd does. He takes care of his sheep that can't take care of themselves. But then all of a sudden, right after it says, God takes care of me, and I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And I was like, these two don't make sense right next to each other. You see what I'm saying? I thought, I don't have all the answers, but I thought of a question. What if those two aren't exclusive? What if in some way us walking through the valley is one way that God can use to take care of us as a shepherd? What if that's a path that sometimes we're supposed to go down, and it's not just an accident that we run into the hardship that we run into? Food for thought. But anyway, so like I said, I talked about a valley. However, that's not the way that this is described. It talks about the valley of the shadow. Pause. Valley of a shadow. Why? Think of it like this. If we're standing right here, right, we're in a valley, and there's a mountain over here, there's a mountain over here. If a valley is in a shadow, here's what that means. It means that the sun is on the other side of the mountain. Just get this image in your head. So you're standing right here, and there's a mountain right here, right? And if the sun is right here, that means that the light is being cast, but it's hitting the mountain, and so the mountain is casting a shadow on the valley. So that's why it's a valley that's in a shadow, because the sun's over here. The sun is past the mountain, right? All I'm trying to do is paint a picture. Are we kind of getting it in our heads? Perfect. But then it says, the valley of the shadow of death. And this one was interesting. I thought about it. And I was like, in order to be in a valley of a shadow of death, right? That must mean that somehow there is a source of light that is being blocked by the mountain, which also must be a source of life. Because if we're in the valley of a shadow of death, the only thing that can cast a shadow of death is a source of light, which is also a source of life. Do we get where I'm going with this yet? A little bit? I thought about it. I thought, what if this passage is talking about a light that's also a source of light, or of life, that sometimes you can't see because it's blocked by a mountain in front of you? Should I say that part again? I know this is kind of deep. This one's kind of deep. What if this passage, the valley of the shadow of death, is talking about a light that is also a source of life that you can't see right now because it's being blocked by a mountain in front of you? Now, here's another thing. If you're walking in this valley of the shadow of death, and right now you're at a spot where you can't see the sun or the light that brings life, right? We can't feel God's presence. That's what it's talking about. We're at a low point in our life where it's like we're trying to reach out for God, but from where we're at, it's almost like we can't see Him. That's what the valley of the shadow of death is. It's like we can't feel Him right now. We really want to, right? The valley's where we need Him the most, but we can't feel Him. Think about this. If you're walking in the valley of the shadow of death, it doesn't mean that the light doesn't exist anymore. It just means that you can't see it from where you're at right now. If you're walking through the valley of the shadow of death, the light is still there. You might just not be able to see it from where you are right now. Make sense so far? Awesome. Let me give you a bit of a heads up with this message. Right now we're kind of in point A. The whole message we're going to kind of divert. We're going to go back to point A. So if you zone out, you miss a bit. Might be confusing how we go from point A back to point A. But we're going to try to get there. And so with this kind of revelation, when I was reading this passage, I kind of went to God and I was like, okay, God, like it's great, it's cool, but why do you make us walk through the valley? That was my biggest question. Why do you make us walk through the valley? Why, if we're trying to follow you, if we're trying to get more of you, why do you put us in seasons where we can't see you, in seasons where we can't feel your presence? Why must we go through those, God? And I didn't quite get an answer, but I got a word: trust. Which is kind of hard. And of course, my question to God was like, God, how am I supposed to trust you when I'm going through a season that hurts right now and I can't feel you? Or like, how am I supposed to trust that you are a healer if right now I'm experiencing pain? Right? Then he led me to these verses here. In John 15, starting at verse 1. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. Have we heard this verse before? God saying, I am the vine, right? Does anyone know about the concept of pruning and what exactly that is? Anybody familiar with it? Yeah, kind of? So basically, there's a bit of a difference between like trimming a tree and pruning a tree. See, you might go outside and you might trim your tree just so that it looks better. But you could also go out and prune your tree, which is a bit of a different process because you're not doing it for looks. What you're trying to do is cut off dead branches, cut off diseased like sprouts or branches, right? Because you want the tree to be healthier. And that's exactly what it talks about here. He prunes it so that it'll be even more fruitful than what it is right now. And so it talks about it says that he will prune these branches so they'll be even more fruitful. However, pruning is unfortunately a pretty painful process. And maybe right now, he's going through your life and pruning off some dead branches. Because maybe something that you always thought was healing, he cut off because it turns out it was just a distraction. if that makes sense. Or maybe right now, he's going through your tree and he's pruning a few things like some old habits, some old relationships, some old ways of living. And it hurts a lot. I mean, there might have been some things that you wanted him to take away, and he did. And you're like, God, thank you so much. But there may have been some things that you didn't want him to take away, but he needed to take away. And he cut those off too. And that hurts. Sometimes it hurts a lot. But I don't want it to be a grim message or leave a sour taste. Because I thought of something. Because right after it says that he prunes them so that they will be more fruitful. Here's what that means. If God is cutting some things out of your life right now, that means that you're about to go into a growing season. If he's cutting off some diseased branches, if he's cutting off some old habits, some old ways of living, if he's saying you got to let that person go, why? Because I have something new for you. Because I have some new fruits for you to bear. Because I have some more growth for you. And the process might be painful, but the reward is worth it. But even in this process, my mind kept going to, God, why? And it's like sometimes I still don't have an answer. And we probably never will, to be honest. And every time I went to God with the why question, God, why are you doing this? God, why did you cut this off? I really like that branch. Why'd you cut that one off, right? He kept saying, trust, trust, trust. And I thought of something. You see, if we ever don't understand something, we need to fill that gap with trust. Let me say it in a different way. Sometimes it's easier to trust God than in other times, right? Because sometimes there's some small things, and it's like, I don't really get this, but it's all right, God, do what you want to do. Sometimes there's some bigger things, though, that when he moves, it's like there's a big gap. It's like, here's what I thought was going to happen. Here's what actually happened, right? And it's like, that's a big gap. That's a big difference, God. I didn't think I would be here right now. And that gap that we don't understand, that's the equivalent amount that we need to fill with trust. That's why it's hard to trust in some situations compared to others, because the gap changes. And the larger that gap gets, the more that we don't understand, the harder it can be to trust God. But he just kept telling me, trust, trust, trust. I was like, God, it's hard to trust when I'm going through a season where I can't feel you. And I want to. I'm seeking that out. And he told me something. He said, Jared, I think that right now you're too busy feeling your pain that you can't feel my presence. And it's like, God, how am I supposed to feel you when I'm in pain right now? Yes, right now you are. But let me read some more scripture for you. And we just read from Psalm 23. And as I did before in some of my other verses, we're going to be looking at the next chapter. Because like I said, I think a lot of people are entering a new season or a new chapter in their lives. So we're going to be reading from the beginning of Psalm 24, the next chapter. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. For he founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. Who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? The one who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not trust in an idol or swear by a false god. They will receive blessing from the Lord and vindication from God their Savior. Such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek your face, God of Jacob. Who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? Let me tell you something. If you're in a valley right now, next up is a mountain. Because as we talked about before, let's paint that picture again. If you're in a valley right now, next up is a mountain. And here's an even cooler part. God is on the other side of the mountain that you're about to climb. Let me say it differently. God is on the other side of what you are about to conquer. And so if you're in that valley right now, if you're in that shadow right now, if you're feeling pain right now, if you can't feel God right now, I know that gap might be big. But if you have enough trust, if you can muster enough trust, I promise you that He's got something on the top of that mountain that you're going through. And it's going to be greater than any view that you've ever had before. So even if it's hard right now, even if you're in pain right now, even if you don't understand what is going on right now, God, I thought that you'd be taking care of me, then why am I in this situation? Trust. He's got you. He's got it. That's all I got. Thanks, guys.